Let me bring the City Council meeting for the City of Wheat Ridge to order. This is the October 22nd meeting, 2018. Would you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Roll call.
Zachary Urban.
Present.
Monica Duran.
Here.
Tim Fitzgerald.
Here.
Leah Dozeman.
Here.
Christy Davis.
Here.
George Pond. Larry Matthews.
Present.
Denise Hoppy.
Thank you. We have a quorum.
We have a quorum, sir.
So now it is time for approval of the study session notes for September 17, 2018. Does anybody have issue with the notes? Then they are approved as they stand. We have no proclamations or ceremonies tonight. So we are now at the citizens' right to speak. And Mr. Dahl is bringing the list. Okay. This portion is on items which are not on the agenda. Items which are not on the agenda are limited to 3 minutes. If you have an item that is on the agenda, at that point, there will be no time limit. So now, Mr. Jim Niquette is at the podium, and John Nance is on deck.
My name is Jim Niquette. I live at 3860 Everett Street in Wheat Ridge, Colorado. It's come to our attention that there was a home at 4055 Everett Street that's on a lot that's been there for many years. The lot is to be subdivided. That doesn't quite fit the character of our neighborhood, which has lots where the home is set back quite a ways. This will provide for a home behind the home in front, and it doesn't quite fit with the way we think about living in Wheat Ridge. Thank you.
Okay, John Nance is next, and on deck is Sally Hance.
Good evening. I would like to cede my time to my wife, with your kind permission, which I often do.
Yeah, smart man.
My name is Sandy Nance. I live at 4097 Field Drive. I have come to express my dismay, my anger that the zoning codes apparently failed to protect my beautiful Bel Air neighborhood. This neighborhood has given so much to Wheat Ridge. The first that I knew of it, like I said, I'm a native, and I was a child, went over to quartet practice, barbershop quartet practice at home and in this neighborhood. And this was Herman Foist's home, and there's a plaque to him in the chapel at Lutheran. He was one of the founders. He was one of the people on the board that got Lutheran Hospital into a hospital instead of a tuberculosis sanitarium. He described this monstrosity that is planned for 4055 Field Drive. They basically took a big, wide front yard and chopped off half of it and are planning on building a tall, skinny house. It's like from front to back, 25 feet, I'm told, and it's three stories, well, 2.5 stories above the lawn. And it's only like 30 feet back from the street. This is not the nature of the neighborhood. All these beautiful ranch homes, and this was a subdevelopment, a development by Amy Eisenhower's brother-in-law. So her brother, I mean, and so he planned beautiful homes, curving streets, landscape. This is like the primo neighborhood. When I moved in, I could finally buy a home there. I was delighted in 1986. And who should be across the street still but Ed Anderson? Ed was the founding mayor of Wheatridge. Ed was the namesake of Anderson Park. So for me, it was a dream come true, and everything about the neighborhood has been wonderful. Everybody, a lot of people we know each other. We have 4th of July parades and ice cream socials. It's that kind of a neighborhood. If Wheatridge City Fathers had followed through on Envision Wheatridge, the comprehensive plan from 2009, if you'd followed through and allowed neighbors to create neighborhood plans, I bet that we would have come up with a plan that said, we're a heritage neighborhood. We're a neighborhood worth preserving the character, the feel, the nature of it. And we don't want these lots subdivided. We don't want things built that are out of character. That some way, some kind of zoning code that would protect the neighborhood. I think what we have now with this monstrosity that's being planned is a rich person's mother-in-law apartment, because what they've done is the little house that sits toward the back of the lot is going to stay, and that's where mom is going to live. And then they're going to build this tall, skinny house, this slot home in front of it. I really would like to revisit that decision, if that subdivision, if we could. I'd like to halt the permit thing, maybe this bulk plane regulations that you were talking about, when you have a little narrow lot and you have a tall house, maybe the bulk plane would not make quite such an eyesore. So could you just halt and wait until you've gotten your decision on the bulk plane for the rest of the city? I was looking at the plat for the lot. I mean, the house in back is going to have its water and sewer lines going underneath the house that's being built in front. That just sounds bad. I think there ought to be some, just revisit it. So a request also that the code be changed so that you can't have subdivisions without public comment. Thank you.
Okay, Courtney Pullen, and following that would be Nancy Van DeMark.
I just want my name on the record. I will give my time to my much more articulate neighbors than myself. Thank you.
Good evening. My name's Nancy Vandemark. I live at 4098 Field Drive. I've been up here the last meeting you had. I will echo some of the comments by my neighbor, Sandy Nance. We really request that we have a time and that the city take time to understand the impact of this redevelopment on our neighborhood, and that we would request that there be some sort of method to reconsider the decision to subdivide, and also for us to have some voice in the process of any kind of future permitting. For this property, we're not asking for forever. We're just asking for the opportunity to have a comment, have some participation in this particular issue that has the potential to impact our neighborhood. I live directly next door to the property, to 4055 Everett, and will be impacted without a doubt on, regardless of what ends up on that property, but would like to have some sort of input into how that looks and feels and how it fits with our neighborhood. And also to work collaboratively with council and with the city staff on any potential changes to code that we might put in place to make sure that this doesn't happen again in other neighborhoods. We believe that, I believe firmly that the city that the city of Wheat Ridge, of all cities, should be listening to the neighbors and the impact of some of these changes on neighbors. It's a critical time for our city and a critical time for our neighborhood. I've lived in Wheat Ridge for nearly 30 years. I moved from Denver because of the lot sizes and because of the character of the neighborhood I live in now, and have no desire to go anywhere else, and only want to continue to have some voice in the future of the use of that land and that neighborhood. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Diane Romero, followed by Betty Niquette. Is Diane Romero here? Desiree Romero?
My name is Diane Romano, and I live at 4091 Field Drive. I am appalled that this plan is even being considered in the neighborhood that I live in. The house in question, the lot in question, is up the street from me. The semi-rural feel, the gracious lot sizes, the homes that have been there, well, mine's been there since, I don't know, 48 or 49, is not huge, is not amazing, but it's lovely in its home. And some of the homes in the neighborhood have been reconstructed with additional levels, and they're beautiful and they fit in beautifully. Having two small homes on a lot that is basically the entrance to my street is going to completely change the feel of our neighborhood, and I just can't even imagine it. So I would very much appreciate reconsideration of the plan. Thank you.
Following Betty would be Gail Thompson.
Hello, my name is Betty Niquette. I live at 3860 Everett Street. I've lived there for about 41 years. And I would simply like to say that however this has been approved, apparently, that this lot be subdivided at 4055 Everett is not in character with the neighborhood. Those of us that have lived in the area live there because this is the way they want to, this is the neighborhood they want to live in. They don't want it to change. We don't want it to change. So I would simply support what has been said prior to me, plus my little addition. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Gail Thompson, followed by Paul Horland.
Hello, my name is Gail Thompson, and I live at 4020 Everett Street. My husband and I live across the street from 4055 Everett. And I just learned a few weeks ago that a home was being built in front of the current home at 4055. And I can tell you, I didn't even know that was possible in our neighborhood. And I'm very disappointed to learn of this development. If you haven't been down our street or through Bel Air neighborhood, I will encourage you to take a walk your dog, drive through, ride a bike, as most people do. And I think you'll find it easy to see why so many people are happy to live here. The homes have large lots. They are perfectly landscaped yards full of plants and flowers. There are scenic views, and there's a very diverse group of people, young and old and everything in between, which really gives our neighborhood a family-friendly feel. Is it too late to change the plan for 4055, that proposed subdivide, and the home at 4055 that greatly impacts our neighborhood and my home? I really can't envision a home being built outside the current streetscape, partly because my fear is it will feel like a home sitting in the middle of a three-way intersection at the corner of Everett and Field Drive. So my question to you is, how can my Bel Air neighborhood and neighbors have more input before these things happen, have prior notice or influence in the future developments of Wheat Ridge? We have 36 homes, I believe, I'm not positive, and a lot of voices that want to be heard, and they're not being heard.
Following Paul is Chris Sidley.
Hi. Hi. My name is Paul Hovland. I've been in these chambers many times. I'm on the Board of Adjustment and have been for 20 plus years. We've seen many cases, some contentious, some not. I was baffled to find that a subdivision was possible without neighborhood input. Our cases on a regular basis have to be notified. We learned otherwise, and I don't think that is the way the code should be. We also have a neighborhood irrigation association. Not the whole Bel Air area, but there are 36 homes in this system that we're blessed with water from Rocky Mountain Ditch, the ponds on 38th. The home in question is one of these homes. We now have an issue complicating. We were not notified of any possible changes as an association, as a utility. How do we deal with this now? Do we subdivide this? Do we add another person to our association? Are we obliged to? Are we, our bylaws were written years ago and have been updated over the years, but this is something that blindsided us completely. How do we deal with this situation? I'm just disappointed the city seems to have failed us in this situation. Thank you.
Following this, Molly Mayfield. Chris, you're next. Yeah.
My name is Chris Chidley. I live at 4020 Everett Street. I live opposite the development. I spoke to you last week. We had images. I think you all have it clear in your mind in terms of what we showed you. I believe I speak on behalf of everybody that is here. We have 20 residents here this evening. We do not accept the decision to subdivide 4055 Everett Street. We also sent you a letter describing our thoughts. There are 40 signatures to that letter. We now have more signatures to that letter. We're probably up to 60. And as I said, there are 20 people here this evening. Everybody you see who's sitting in front of you is here to speak about this. You are all aware of what Envision Wheat Ridge is. It's a directive for the development of the city, the neighborhoods, and the residents. Bel Air, as I may have spoke before, is cited as one of 3 neighborhoods as an example of what Wheat Ridge is and the character. These comments are directly from Envision Wheat Ridge. which are to preserve and highlight neighborhoods like this on large lots with a unique quality, streetscape, mature landscaping, and a semi-rural quality in terms of how the roads and the appearance are. In Envision Wheatridge, you repeatedly, or there is a repeatedly quality asking for to maintain these neighborhoods, to preserve these neighborhoods, and to protect these neighborhoods. I have an example for you in terms of what this proposed lot, which is a house built in front of a house, is typically. There are 3 streets in a row named Dover, Carr, and Cody. Cody being a middle street, which is actually missing between 2 blocks. This gives houses almost a depth of 300 feet, a 300-foot depth to your backyard. In these neighborhoods, what they've done is they've created a small alleyway that leads to a house behind. The streetscape is not changed. The houses are not visible. The character is retained. But on our corner, the corner is now going to be diluted by this house. There will no longer be a semi-rural feeling, as we pointed out. This is a house built in front of a house. This is no longer a unique neighborhood. As again, we do not accept the decision to subdivide 4055. Thank you very much.
Following Molly is Deb Johnson.
Hi, my name is Molly Mayfield. I live at 4065 Field Drive. I've lived in the neighborhood 32 years. I live down the block from the property in question. I echo all my neighbors. We're not happy with the decision. I guess I would just say, even if it's illegal, if they have a legal right to do this, it's not the right thing to do. It really is not within the character of the neighborhood. And I'm sort of astonished that this would happen without neighborhood input when I feel like I would need to get a variance of some kind just to put a shed on my property next to my fence. And this is a house in front of a house. It doesn't fit with the nature of the neighborhood. Thank you.
Following Deb is Suzanne. Okay. Okay. Julie Hahn. Okay, let's see if there's anybody else. Amy Burnett.
Good evening. My name's Amy Burkett. I live at 4040 Everett Street. I live directly across the street from at 4055 Everett Street. I'm an architect. I moved to my house in April, so I've only been there 6 months. I looked all over the entire Denver metro region to find this perfect neighborhood and my perfect 1950s house with my large lot. I found it by satellite. I looked for winding streets with big trees that had a neighborhood because I wanted to be part of a neighborhood. I'm an architect. Yes, I care about my dwelling, but I'm also equally passionate about my neighborhood and my neighbors who have rallied together here that we're so upset. This developer who purchased the house across the street from me, she purchased it weeks before I purchased my house. She came over and would have coffee with us on our front porch, asking us what we were going to be doing with our house. We asked her what she was doing. Never did she disclose. She said, I'm doing a kitchen and we're terracing the backyard. This is a classic, devious, underhanded development. It is a money play and it's disgusting. In a family neighborhood that people have been in these neighborhoods, in the neighborhood for 30 to 40 years, and I'm the newcomer and I'm disgusted. With quality, sophisticated developers, they come and they disclose and they talk because they try to gain consensus. Any great developer that I've ever worked with has a very sophisticated process about gaining neighborhood consensus. So they don't have this disaster on their hands where everyone is so upset. If you drove by, and I would hope you will come by our neighborhood if you haven't in a while, and drive down, and you will see how crazy it is and how terrible it's going to look. It will look like a house dropped in from Oz and was dumped in the front yard of another house. I'll be looking at the sides of 2 houses. There is no, from a quality planning standpoint, a corner lot is meant to anchor its surroundings. This is a obtuse corner, even more so, where that corner should anchor its neighborhood. It has an emotion. It is fundamental to successful development and planning. And so to suddenly have the house drop in from Oz that's going to look ridiculous, anchoring this corner of this beautiful, wonderful neighborhood is a crime. Thank you.
Michelle Burkett. I'm sorry.
Close enough, I guess. I live at 4040 Everett Street, right across the street, and I was out of town last week, and I came in late last night. I got up this morning. Of course, I knew we were going to be here this evening. I got up this morning. I walked outside, and the first thing I saw was this absolutely brilliant red tree that had changed colors in the few days that I was gone. And I realized that that tree and the other trees in that front yard are going to be gone. And I'm going to have to look at the side of this house parked like a trailer home in front of another house. And then my view down Field Street to the foothills beyond, and their view, will now be completely obliterated by a house that should not be there. I am an architect. I've been here 40 years. I am also have a degree in city planning, and I know more than enough to know that this is not the way these kinds of situations should be handled. Despite the rules and the regulations that may be on the books, this neighborhood should have been notified. They should have been aware of such a thing, and there was absolutely no attempt to do that, either by the city or particularly, as Amy just pointed out, by the neighbor themselves. This is a greedy move. It's an unfortunate move, and it is not right. And I very much encourage you to look deeper into this issue and to reconsider it, because it is not fair for one person to be able to change the lives of so many. Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak? Just to let you know, I drove by the house this afternoon, and I truly understand what you're talking about. Mr. Dahl, could you give us advice on our ability to reconsider why there was no input from the neighborhood and
he's trying to shut me down.
Public meeting? Pardon?
Sure. This is an administrative subdivision. Under the city's code, administrative subdivisions are processed exclusively by the community development director. Community development staff makes a recommendation to the director, who makes a final decision. The code was amended in 2014 to expand administrative subdivision review to 3 lots, the creation of 3 lots, but prior to that time, there was a pre-existing section that was the same, only it was limited to 2 lots. So here it's a 2-lot subdivision, so even under the pre-2014 code, it would have been an administrative subdivision review. The community development director is authorized to make that decision, which is final, if the proposed subdivision, the lots, meet zoning and subdivision design standards, which in this case would be setbacks from the street, setbacks from property lines. I've read this quick summary of the staff review, and it appears that this subdivision meets those requirements. So from a code standpoint, the code was followed. It is true, the code for administrative subdivisions does not provide for or require any form of public notice, and it is a decision made exclusively by the Community Development Director. So that decision was made within the last couple of months and is final. The only opportunity for the council to become involved would be sort of twofold, I suppose. With respect to just this subdivision, it's pretty far along, and the only thing probably necessary for construction would be a building permit at this point. The council has used the moratorium technique in the past, most recently, I think, for freestanding emergency facilities, if you recall. That was, I think, the last time moratorium has been used. It basically freezes things while you develop regulations. So it's possible that council could adopt a moratorium. It would have to be by ordinance. A moratorium on the issuance of, say, building permits for this kind of subdivision pending the council's review of the proposed changes to the regulations. I don't know how successful that would be, depending upon whether there's a building permit out there, and I haven't checked that, and you know, would take direction from you to me to create an ordinance that would have to come back to you for you to enact. The council doesn't have the ability to just tonight or anytime make a decision to reconsider an administrative decision. There's processes and procedures in the code for that. It'd be no different than the council, say, deciding to reconsider a building permit, another form of administrative decision that is not within your control unless you exercise the moratorium authority, change the rules in the book to apply to development like this. Alternatively, of course, if you got to the point where you're rewriting regulations, whether it be regulations that would apply to this development under a moratorium or more generally, then you probably can want to consider a couple of issues that have come up, whether even if it remains administrative, there should be a public notice process layered in. Similar to, as was mentioned with variances, absolutely true. I've attended the Board of Adjustment many, many times over the years, and I think there's a 300 or 600, it varies in the code, I think 300-foot property notice requirement for variances. That number may be wrong, but I know there's a distance limit, and we have those elsewhere in the code for rezonings, et cetera. Typically, we don't have them for subdivision because that's dividing up property, so long as it's consistent with the zoning. But you could certainly include that. That'd be one change. And you could go further, I suppose, and say no administrative subdivision reviews, or, you know, you get an administrative recommendation as you do for other forms, but it's got to go through a public hearing process. A minor subdivision, which is the next step up, 4 lots and greater, 4 and 5 lots goes to Planning Commission, and they're the final decision maker. 5 lots or above 5 lots goes to through Planning Commission for recommendation and to you. And both at Planning Commission and City Council, of course, there's noticing and public hearing. So that's kind of a range of things that you could do generally in terms of changing the code in the general way that was described, but specifically your opportunities are much more limited with respect to an approval that's been granted. And the most you could do there would be to consider a moratorium ordinance on building permits, I would expect. And obviously that does affect an entitlement that property owner now has, having followed the rules that were in place. And I understand how people feel about the result, but you know, it's partly my job to tell you that if you were to enact a moratorium ordinance, you'd be sort of attacking that approval. And I understand that's the desire. So my goal is to tell you what tools you have, and one of those is moratorium, but that, you know, it raises the stakes a little bit on that landowner too.
Are you suggesting that we would put ourselves at risk for a liability suit if we did put a moratorium?
Well, I need to learn where we are in the building permit approval process. As the council's aware, there's a thing called vested rights. Once you say yes to land use approval, people have the right to rely on that and go spend money in getting in, and that's, they've created a vested property right when they do that. And to the extent that there has been reliance on that approval and money has been spent, then it's a subjective arena. You know, when do you cross an imaginary line? How much money's been spent? How much reliance has there been? But the longer time goes on, obviously there's more potential for reliance. And if money gets spent and that would not be retrievable, then that's the money that's at risk. And that's where I, the property owner, the claim I would make. You know, I hesitate to, in comments at the beginning of a city council meeting, outline, everyone's claims in a vested rights lawsuit that gets filed way down the road. I hope you can understand. There's a limit to how much, I can either tell you or how much is going to be reliable based upon lots of intervening events. But that's how the law works. When you give an approval that people are entitled to rely on, and they do, and then you say you're going to take it back, then if to the extent there's been reliance, then you do have an exposure.
Okay, would you explain use by right, the concept?
Sure. Here, a use by right is, the zoning code says you can do these kinds of uses in this zone district without getting rezoning approval or special approval of variance or a conditional or a special use permit. Here, the use is a residential use, and even the use as proposed of the second lot is a residential use, so that's a use by right. That term doesn't apply so usefully here. What has been obtained about 3 weeks ago is subdivision approval for a second lot, or to divide this lot into two. That's not so much a use by right as it is an approval. A use by right would be, is this allowed for commercial, or can you do a dog kennel here, or cleaners, or a residential, or a multifamily? If it's zoned for that, that's a use by right, and all I have to do is get a building permit to do that. Here, in order to have the second lot, they've gone through the administrative review process and gotten the approval. So now the next approval is building permit. So use by right doesn't completely apply, but if what you're trying to say is there presently a right to do this? The answer is yes. And the way you implement that right is you go get a building permit to build the structure, and that's really the last permit that the city, that's the last stop for development of a structure like this would be a building permit.
So what I hear you saying is we have two choices. We can either allow this to go ahead, or we can place a moratorium on the issuing of building permits.
Yes, and the only way to do a moratorium would be by ordinance. The case law is pretty clear. You need to act by ordinance to impose moratoria. You can do an emergency ordinance, of course, one reading, but it still requires that you direct me to prepare the ordinance. I will. It'll be on your agenda, and you can decide whether to approve it. I'd write it as narrowly as I could. It'd be a moratorium on the issuance of building permits for administrative subdivisions, I guess. That's probably about as narrow as I could make it. And you'd want to consider it, probably pretty quickly if there's, broad council, if there's majority council support to do it, we certainly will. As you know, ordinances require 5 affirmative votes, and emergency ordinances that require more. I'm going to go check. I think it's 6. So there's that. But yeah, at this point, you're at citizens' right to speak. You haven't approved an agenda. I would suggest that, that you typically don't take action. In fact, you usually don't engage this kind of discussion, citizens' right to speak. But I understand and appreciate that it's timely, and you want to be able to. But if you want to take some kinds of actions and have further discussion when you approve the agenda, which is the next item on your agenda. If you desire to talk about this more, you should plug it into the agenda, and then we can have the discussion.
If it please the chair, I had requested a chance to respond to the citizens' right to speak.
That takes a vote of council.
No, it does not.
Well, it does to answer the audience.
Mr. Dahl, I believe we used to have a right to respond to the citizens without a vote of council.
I'm not sure that the council rules apply or deal with this, so I'm going to have to say that whoever's running the meeting, in this case it's the chair is Mr. Fitzgerald, he answers those procedural questions.
Well, if there is no hard and fast rule.
If I may go to council, sit under citizens' rights, council rules, council has the choice whether or not to respond to citizens after the closure of the citizen comment portions of the meetings. In the past, it's always been interpreted that a council member may speak and respond to his constituents.
Please go ahead.
Thank you. I do have some comments, and based on what Mr. Dahl has just mentioned, I may have to change some of this. I appreciate the situation that the people are in, and to that extent I have prepared some comments so I can try and stay organized and be brief. Referring first to section 26-102 of our code, intent and purpose, and I will just read portions of that are germane to the issue. The intent and purpose of the zoning code of the City of Wheat Ridge is to encourage the most appropriate use of land throughout the city, to ensure a logical growth of the various physical elements of the city, to lessen congestion in the streets, and there's a portion here I'll skip to provide adequate light and air to residents, structures, and properties within the city, to improve housing standards, and to conserve property values. And I will jump again to another sentence at the end of this code section. It is further the intent of this zoning code to preserve the right of citizens to participate in the making of decisions which will affect their properties, while preserving to the maximum lawful extent the legislative and quasi-judicial discretion of the elected representatives of the City of Wheat Ridge. These people were denied that right to participate in this decision, and as such, any decisions that were made without consulting with them and including them in the process, I contend, should be null and void and should be reconsidered. To that extent, I would submit the following motion. I move...
Can I have a point of order, and perhaps we put this on the agenda?
Yeah.
Because, I mean, this, as Mr. Dahl had said, we can't make actions on the citizen's right to speak. So I'd like to have a point of order and put this issue on the agenda.
Yes, well, you will be recognized during the elected official matters.
Are we going to make these folks wait to the end of the meeting?
They can do that if they want.
It's my understanding that I can make a motion anytime I wish to from the dais.
Well, he just said we can't make actions during citizens' right to speak.
It's no longer citizens' right to speak. That's been closed.
I agree. Patrick checked the council rules. I said to myself, am I going to need them tonight? And the one time I didn't bring them, but now Patrick's got them. He confirms that, as you say, you can respond to citizens at citizens' right to speak, and that's been done. I agree that if you're going to be taking actions, it should be on the agenda, but I don't see any reason you couldn't, at approval of the agenda, which is the very next thing on your agenda, that as a part of approval of agenda, you could ask that this matter be set for action. And the agenda is really, again, this is me telling you how to feel about it, but your agenda is really light.
I will defer and make my request when we go to moving on the approval of the agenda.
You could make it agenda item number 1A before after consent and before ordinances on first reading. You'd be at it in about 5 minutes. Just a suggestion.
That would have to be agenda item 6, would it not?
Or we could
No,
put it
you
on
can,
the
you
first
can
agenda.
put it where, it doesn't have to be on the end. Council often stitches things in wherever they like in the agenda.
All right. So did you make a move, did you move?
No, Mr. Chair, I think that the next thing you need to do is go to the next agenda item, which is approval of the agenda, take a motion to approve the agenda, and then I'll bet there would be an amendment to that motion to add this item at a location. That's my suggestion.
Okay, we'll take a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
All in favor?
Do you want to make as a part of your motion that you add this, an action item on this before number 2?
Okay, I move to add an agenda item number 2, that we discuss a moratorium and the subdivision issue for 4055 Everett Street, both in the immediacy of now and our options for future action.
Second.
All in favor?
Motion carries 6-0.
Yeah, for the audience, the mayor's not here tonight. Mr. Fitzgerald's sitting in for the mayor because the mayor pro tem's not present. But when Mr. Fitzgerald sits as the chair, he votes like a regular council member. And so the green light for Mayor Starker is actually Mr. Fitzgerald, but he's voting as a council member.
You'll have to like cross over and vote.
Yeah, I'll have to reach over.
Reach over and vote.
I'll do that. Okay, so would you like to state your motion?
No, that was that passed, right?
Yep.
So we're done.
Changed it to item number 2.
It's number 2.
Right.
So now you take up the consent agenda is number 1.
Oh, okay, all right. So consent agenda is Zach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. The motion is to approve the payment of the Kaiser Permanente for November 2018 membership billing in the amount of $205,058.38.
Is there a
Second.
Second.
Are you ready for a vote?
Yes, sir. Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, so do you want to do that now?
Sure.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will make the following motion. I move that the administrative subdivision application and subsequent building permit processes, both completed and in progress, for the original and new lots at 4055 Everett Street in Wheat Ridge be immediately suspended by moratorium. I also move that a public hearing before council be scheduled to allow public comment and a subsequent vote on the subdivision and potential permitting to be taken place by council with the council decision to override the administrative process.
Second.
Mr. Dahl, this is for a specific address. Is it legal to make a motion on a specific address?
I think not. As I described earlier, the code process for administrative subdivisions is final and complete at the decision of the Community Development Director, and those are the rules in the book. Council has the ability to rewrite the rules, because you wrote that rule to begin with and amended it back in 2014, as I said, to change from 2 lots to 3. But the book does not provide for you to set aside those decisions or to kind of create an appeal process on the spot, because that would be attempting to rewrite the book, which you have the right to do, but you have a process to rewrite the book, and it's an ordinance. That's how you change the book. And you can't sort of say, this is what we'd like the book to say, and so we're going to actually act on it as if it were in the book. And I'm taking too long to say, the way to rewrite the book is you run an ordinance to rewrite the book and create some kind of noticing and public hearing process.
If it please the chair.
But meanwhile, if you want to stall this, the only way to stall approvals is to to have a moratorium ordinance that would stall them.
Is that an emergency ordinance?
It's up to you. I thought in the freestanding emergency rooms, I think we did one, help me remember, we might have done a regular 2-reading ordinance, but you've got the right to do an emergency ordinance anytime, 1 reading, set it on the next council agenda, and it'll, if I'm directed to write it, I will write it as narrowly as possible, and it'll be on your agenda, and you can adopt it as an emergency, or you would have the right to adopt it as a first reading and, then second reading 2 weeks later. I get it that if your desire is to try to affect this property, you'd want to act more quickly, and the emergency ordinance technique is available to you.
If it please the chair and my second, I will reword this motion to the following. I hereby move that all administrative subdivision applications and processes go into immediate moratorium to be considered by this council at the earliest possible date.
Second.
Yeah.
Second. Agree.
Comments?
So I have a few questions. So the way that was worded, it would go under 2 readings. Is that correct?
No, what I heard was, what I was kind of expecting to hear was a motion directing me to prepare an emergency ordinance for a
Right, that's
moratorium
why I'm clarifying.
to
He
be
didn't say
considered in 2 weeks. Because I think you
I'm
can
more
do
than
that.
happy to have this worded so it happens quickly. I'm just not lawyer enough.
Can we ask some questions first?
There'll be discussion, I assume. It's
Well,
a
that's
motion.
where we were.
Yeah.
We were asking questions. Patrick, do you know, as far as this property, I mean, I guess some of the questions are on the process. One of the questions is if the permit's already been issued. I don't know if
only a subdivision approval has been approved, but a building permit has not been applied for yet, if that's what you're asking. So as Mr. Dahl noted, again, the process has been followed according to the book, as we're calling it tonight, the book. The process was followed for the approval of the subdivision, but building permit has not been pulled. I think what Mr. Dahl is suggesting is you could do an emergency moratorium on building permits, very narrowly defined, so that this project could be slowed down until you have a chance to speak to it.
Could you maybe speak to how, like, the criterion for this administrative process? Like, do they look at our guiding documents? Some of the residents have discussed Envision Wheat Ridge in particular, and about how the Bel Air neighborhood was specifically stated in there to be preserved.
That is correct. The Bel Air subdivision or comprehensive plan did reference the Bel Air subdivision in the introductory paragraph of Chapter 5, Neighborhoods and Housing. It states in part, residents embrace strong and established neighborhoods such as Bel Air and aim to preserve and highlight their unique qualities, which include scenic views, architectural styles, and semi-rural character. But that is not referred to for a subdivision. City council or staff does not have the discretion to determine if a subdivision is preserving a neighborhood or not. If you want to get more detailed, that needs to be in code. You need to have specific regs that for Bel Air neighborhood, you could do an overlay district that subdivisions are not allowed. But that's not what's in code today. But this property did meet all the other requirements. Mr. Dahl has the book open, but in general, this property was, again, split into 2 lots. The minimum lot size in the R1 district is 12,500 square feet. This subdivision has divided into 2 resulting lots, approximately one of 13,000 square feet and one of 17,000 square feet. Both comply with the minimum lot width, and both would comply with all setback requirements based on what we understand would be built on the property. So all the setbacks and lot sizes have been met.
Could you maybe elaborate on what those are and the plan for the house that they would be building, if that's
You have the setbacks section open.
amenable?
I don't.
Let's see. I don't think he talks about not setbacks. R1. Minimum lot width of 100 feet is another requirement, which this property has met.
It's in the R1 zone district. The maximum height is for a one-family dwelling 35 feet, maximum building coverage 25%. Minimum lot area 12,005. I think these are just over 13, both of them.
13 and 17, I think.
13 and 17, okay, fine. Minimum lot width 100 feet, minimum front yard setback 30 feet, side yard setback 15, rear yard setback 15.
I have not recognized a second, so would you like to reword your emergency ordinance?
Okay, let's take stab number 3. And I'm open to assistance from our city attorney. I move that we immediately enact an ordinance to enact a moratorium on all building permits related to administrative subdivisions, and that this item be brought back before council at the earliest possible moment for one reading only.
Second, but can you say emergency moratorium?
Emergency moratorium. Emergency ordinance.
Emergency ordinance. Thank you. Second it.
Okay, discussion? Yes.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to cut part of my first comment out here because Mr. Goff already referred to it, but I'll just jump to that sentence. Residents embrace, this is from our Envision Wheat Ridge statement. Residents embrace strong and established neighborhoods such as Paramount Heights, Applewood Hills, and Bel Air, and aim to preserve and highlight their unique qualities, which include scenic views, architectural styles, or semi-rural character. Our codes have 3 basic functions. The first 2 are technical in function. The first is the creation of zone areas. Bel Air is zoned R1. From our codes, this district is established to provide high quality, safe, quiet, and stable, low-density residential neighborhoods, and to prohibit activities of any nature which are incompatible with the low-density residential character. The second dictates what can be done inside a zoned area, lot sizes, setbacks, building heights, and other technical details of individual buildings and their uses. The third and equally important function describes the more abstract concept of the neighborhood character. The first 2 are fairly cut and dry. Numbers are numbers. The third function is harder to define. What is the character of a neighborhood? Yet it has tremendous impact on how the first 2 functions are allowed. To consider only the first 2 technical functions is to deny the neighborhood the opportunity to determine and maintain the future of their community. Function 3 is at the center of most neighborhood disputes. The conflict arises over the age-old battle of individual property rights versus the rights of the neighborhood. How do we cut the baby in half? How do we best serve both parties in the dispute? It boils down to a problem of leakage. What leaks off one person's property to affect the rest of the neighborhood? Just as we have prohibitions to our First Amendment right to free speech, we have prohibitions to what we can do with our property. I can't yell fire in this arena. I can't add 4 stories to my house. The question in this case revolves around the creation of 2 lots out of 1 and the ensuing development of both lots. How does this affect the character of the neighborhood? It's not just numbers. There is no doubt that the neighborhood was denied their right to an open and honest discussion, their input on how their neighborhood was being affected by this condition. I go back to section 26-01, where it states, "It is further the intent of this zoning," and that refers to the whole zoning code, "to preserve the right of citizens to participate in the making of decisions which affect their properties." These people were denied that right. To this end, we must place a retroactive hold on the administrative process taking place and revisit both the issue at 4055 Everett Street, but also our administrative subdivision code in total. I do not know how the final council vote will play out, but I do know the neighbors deserve their day in court before their elected representatives, a right they have been not denied by our poorly written code. Everyone deserves and should have the right to an appeal, and they have been denied this right. And I would argue that because the third function of our zoning was not carried out in the subdivision process, that this case especially should be part of the moratorium and should be handled with as quickly and deftly as possible by a full city council. Thank you.
Further comment? Yeah, Christie?
So I have a few comments. One, I walk the neighborhood a lot. In fact, I call that corner the Bermuda Triangle, because I walk two dogs, and some dogs at that corner come out of their yards, and I have dogs that don't like other dogs, so it's like I call it the Bermuda Triangle. So, an aside. Now I walk at 4 or 5 in the morning, so that's good news. I have just a few questions, and it follows a lot of what Mr. Matthews says. I do feel that we do need to have a study session on if someone's going to, to look at the process as far as when it comes to a subdivision of the property. I mean, I 100% agree with that, because I do think that the neighborhood should have a part of that. I have mixed feelings on some of this as well, because I think that the person at the property was following the rules that were set for them. So for us to kind of switch rules in the middle, I mean, that's a pickle. I mean, we're in a pickle. Because no matter what decision's made, it's going to affect people that were otherwise abiding by the rules that we set forth. So if it be shame on us for having that rule to begin with, it's one of those things that you don't realize you have that rule till something like this comes up, and then it's like, wow, people can subdivide, and it could happen previously and not really had an effect, and in this case it does. I also respect the neighborhood, the dynamics of the neighborhood. But there are some interesting dynamics in that neighborhood, walking it, and living not far from it. You do have your ranch-style homes, and then you have very contemporary homes that were built up. And I'm sure at the time those very contemporary homes that were being built up maybe got some grumblings. They're beautiful, by the way. I love the garage doors. I'm sure that there were some grumblings there too, that a ranch home is now next to a 2.5, 3-story home. And then it looks like on the back of the one, it looks very similar to how this one was described, that there's like a mother-in-law's unit, because that's also on one of the corners too, when you look close at some of these properties. So it's interesting, because although I hear, some of these things being said, which are very true, I could pick out homes that are like, well, how is that different than this home? And I don't know how the rules were followed back then, what it is, when it was done. I've lived here 52 years. Don't know that I paid that much attention back then as far as the properties, but you can see that some of this stuff was not done in 57 or 60 when some of these ranch-style homes were built. I know someone referred to like neighborhood charter or something. I know I have something similar to mine, and mine says that you can't have two-story homes. So then you already got a couple of those in that neighborhood that don't follow that charter if that's the case. So I see that there's a lot of differences here. And I think it is a difficult situation. I think it's a difficult situation for all of us sitting here. I think it's a difficult situation for the neighbors. I think it's a difficult situation for the person who purchased the property maybe in mind with what they were going to do. I don't know if they were being honest or dishonest with maybe neighborhood discussions, but who knows, they could have changed their mind, I don't know. But I think it's a difficult situation. And I would also, like to look at, the idea that if we sublet property, that the neighborhood has the right to be a part of that process. But I do think this situation at hand is a tough one, because the person who's going to be affected, the neighborhood's affected too, but also the rules were being followed in this situation, so it's hard.
Thank you. I guess for me, the most important thing here is that the voices of the community weren't heard. I realize it's a difficult decision, and it's kind of at this point, a no-win, but I think there still is the possibility here that if their voices would have been heard and there would have been outreach, maybe there could have been a compromise between what the owner of that property is going to do and what the neighborhood wanted. It's called communication and just working together. So for me, the most important thing, and I'm hearing the same thing I heard back in 2016 when we were trying to address the bulk plane and height restrictions in the east part of Wheat Ridge, which is why I wanted to deal with it then. It's listening to our constituents, listening to the people that we serve. The list here says they want a voice. They want to keep the character of their neighborhood. They want that semi-rural feel, but most importantly, it's just being included in the process. So I'm going to support this. I think it's the right thing to do. I think we've already have had a few mishaps before, and I think we need to learn from those, and we need to realize that let's listen to the neighborhood. Let's figure out a compromise. Maybe there is one, and let's see where it goes from there. Thank you.
I'd like to add something. I remember a few years ago we had a situation where somebody bought a piece of commercial property, which at the time was zoned for marijuana use, and he paid more than market price for that property. We changed the code before he could complete his sale, and that property is still vacant. And in essence, we robbed him of the value of his property. And I have felt guilty about that since that happened, which was a couple of years ago. So I just want to say, I understand what you're saying, Christy. That the person who bought that property had something in mind, and it was legal. So it is quite possible that we're robbing him of his use of his intended use of that property. On the other hand, I do understand the neighbors. That neighborhood is a choice neighborhood, and it needs to be preserved in the way it is. So I just want to say that this is difficult, and I have feelings for the property owner.
So this is one of those situations where it's kind of a double-edged sword. I completely understand all of your points of view, and I think that they are all valid points, and I do think that we need to address in the code that the public should have the ability to have a say in subdivisions and uses in their neighborhood. We've seen it repeatedly on council of residents coming and wanting to preserve the character of Wheat Ridge. I have a hard time specifically with this neighborhood because I drive this area a lot from my house to Lutheran where I work, and I don't really recognize any one specific type of character in this neighborhood. The architectural designs are all very different. There's nothing that's really standard about them. You know, you have some homes are still the bungalows that were built in the 50s and 60s. Some have been added onto. Some of them are 3-story. Some of them are box houses. Like the character of the neighborhood has changed immensely since the incorporation of our city. And I actually have a really hard time understanding what a lot of people say when they talk specifically about the character of Wheat Ridge, because I find myself asking, well, which decade of the character of Wheat Ridge, because it's changed so much since I've lived here and I'm a lifelong resident. I live off of 44th and Hoyt Street, and when my parents bought our home, the area across the street was a huge vacant field. And now there's a liquor store and some gas stations and Big O Tires. And so if you ask my neighbor who lives down the street what the character of Wheat Ridge was when she lived here, she moved here in the 1940s, 1950s, and she was one of the first houses on the entire block. So that's really challenging for me, and I'm going to support this in the respect that I think that you guys should have had a say from the beginning of the process. And I think that you are owed that as neighbors of this community. And I just want to tell you that this is kind of one of those things that's really challenging. So thank you for coming and speaking tonight.
Larry?
I'd just like to clarify something. According to conversations that I've had with the neighborhood, when they first found out about the subdivision, they did request a hearing, and they were told they weren't going to get it. Now, I would read from the code here, and it says this is an administrative process that does not require a public hearing. It does not say there cannot be one. They did ask before this got this far down the road for public hearing, and they were denied. And we have a code that specifically mentions that they should have a right to participate in these decisions, and that was denied to them. And I don't see how we cannot pass this motion. Thank you.
Zach?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor Pro Tem. You know, it's I wholeheartedly agree with the residents' concerns about this subdivision, and I don't agree with the fact that you weren't able to participate in the public input process, because in this category there was none. And so as much as I feel on that side, I'm also somewhat concerned because we're addressing a property owner who isn't here to be able to present their side of the story or their evidence or their information relative to what they may or may not be doing. And as much as we can imply and impugn and otherwise try to figure out what's going on based on what's happened heretofore, I don't think it's appropriate that we litigate any particulars of this particular property, but to the greater extent relative to how you modified the motion to be more in general about the administrative subdivision process, because I think that's where the rub is, and making sure that in that process we have a little bit more transparency and a little bit more public input, because I think that's what will help make that process smoother in the end. But as it relates to a specific property and property owner who isn't here to be able to offer testimony, I think it would be somewhat inappropriate to focus on that as much as the larger issue, but I will be supporting this.
I just want to offer a word of caution. We are not going to meet next week because it's the 5th Monday. So there is a significant period of time before this will take effect.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, I think Mr. Dahl is ready to give
Can
you
I adjust the
time.
I can adjust the timing. I can address the timing question. Rarely, but occasionally, the council will ask me to whip up an ordinance on the spot, and I've been furiously doing that right this minute. You're right. There is an entitlement to a building permit. If I were the property owner, I'd come in tomorrow, and the building department would be required to issue a building permit. That's the That's the nature of uses by right once the subdivision's been approved, and I know you don't want to unwind a general rule like that. That's only fair. So you have, I think, a couple choices around effectiveness of the moratorium. You could wait until your next meeting, which is the second Monday in, would be November 19. And in between, if a building permit comes in, then it comes in. And so there's that. You have the right to adopt an emergency ordinance tonight. It would require the 5 votes. I checked, it's still the same number of votes, but it's an emergency ordinance. And you certainly could, and I've written it quickly, so you can do that. The difference, of course, is if you act tonight, you haven't had the opportunity, I suppose, to hear from this particular property owner either. Your choice, not something I get to decide, it's something you get to decide. But I wanted to make you aware of what your choices were, which are act tonight, and you can have a moratorium that's effective before tomorrow morning, and so no building permits, and none has yet been issued. Or wait until the 19th. You do take a risk there, and you're the ones to evaluate that risk, not me. So in terms of the motion, I think what I'm hearing the motion doing is directing me to write the ordinance. And if that motion passes, then the one I've written is ready to go. Then you'll need to decide if you want to adopt that ordinance tonight or on the 19th. So first, I think you need to know if there's a majority support on this council here tonight to direct that ordinance get written. And so you probably need to go ahead and take that vote, because that tells you whether there's majority support tonight to even do this.
Thank you. Do we have a second?
Second.
There's been a proposal and a second. Comments, further comments? Yes.
Let me understand, kind of a point of order here. Is the motion that we're just about to vote for going to include initiating the moratorium tonight?
What I would suggest is this, a 2-step process, that your motion, if you and the maker of the second will agree, that motion be a lot more simple than it presently is, which is direct the city attorney to prepare an ordinance imposing a moratorium on building permits in this circumstance. If that passes, then I've done so. And then you can take a second motion to say, I want to consider that motion tonight, or I want to consider it on the 19th. So I would start sort of simple and say, am I directed to prepare a moratorium ordinance on building permits in this circumstance? And that tells you whether there's support here for this. Is that the actual motion?
Yes, I would. If I haven't stated it correctly, my motion is that you prepare the ordinance and that we vote on that ordinance. And I would also remind everyone that I find it interesting that some folks are objecting that the landowner wouldn't be here to have their say. And that's the same situation that the neighborhood folks were in when the original process took place. So if we enact this motion tonight, everybody will be allowed to come to the table and express their viewpoints. Thank you.
What I would suggest is that the motion be even simpler. What I'm trying to get is 2 actions, not 1. That there be a motion directing me to write the ordinance. If that passes, then I think you decide if you adopt the ordinance tonight. Because I'm not saying, I don't know how the votes are, but I think you ought to at least tell me to write it first, and then we can talk about adopting it. Does the maker of the second agree with that?
Yes.
Yes.
Great.
I do.
So moved. I move that we direct the city attorney to write the ordinance for a moratorium against administrative permits for administrative subdivisions.
Perfect.
Second.
Okay, let's vote. All those in favor? Or let's vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
Yes.
Okay, I move that we direct that we make the
You just did. What I would suggest is, I can read you what I think the ordinance is.
Okay.
And you can move to adopt it.
Okay.
And we'll see if it gets, and then you're truly done. Do we have an ordinance number?
It would be 1656.
Okay. Obviously, it can't be distributed, so I'm just going to have to read it to you, and you can tell me if it does what you're intending. It'd be ordinance number 1656, introduced by Councilmember Matthews. An ordinance imposing a temporary moratorium upon certain building permits and declaring an emergency is the title. The whereas clauses, the first two are the same as you have for most of your ordinances, that the city is a home rule municipality having all powers conferred by Article 20 of the Constitution, and secondly, that pursuant to its home rule authority and the statute, the city acting through the city council is authorized to adopt ordinances for the protection of public health, safety, or welfare. And whereas the council now wishes to impose a moratorium upon the issuance of building permits for single-family residences within administratively approved subdivisions within the R1 zone district in order to consider adoption of regulations to address the procedures for review of administrative subdivisions under Code Section 406B. Now therefore be it ordained by the City Council of the City of Wheat Ridge. Now there are 3 sections to the ordinance. First section is moratorium declared. The council hereby imposes a temporary moratorium upon acceptance, processing, and approval of building permits for construction of single-family residences within the R1 zone district within subdivisions approved administratively pursuant to Code of Laws 26406B. Section 2 of the ordinance would read, this moratorium shall terminate on January 20, 2019, unless sooner terminated. That's because emergency ordinances under the charter may only last for 90 days. That's a requirement. Section 3 of the ordinance is an emergency declared and an effective date. Pursuant to Section 5.13 of the charter, council hereby declares an emergency to exist requiring immediate effectiveness of this ordinance in order to permit the council to consider revised regulations for administrative subdivisions without jeopardizing current land development patterns. This ordinance shall take effect upon adoption. So that's what I can do.
I didn't know I had that in me. So moved.
Second.
So do you accept that language?
Yes, I do.
And
So
I
moved.
second.
Okay. All those, let's vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
Mr. Mayor Pro Tem, before we move on, I just want to point out that this is a prime example of why we're doing the update to the neighborhood revitalization strategy. Unfortunately, we're not farther along than we are at this point, but these are the types of discussions that we're hoping the community is going to have. So I invite the whole audience here tonight to get involved when these meetings become out to the public so that you can have your input on how we preserve our neighborhoods in Wheat Ridge.
Okay, I might add to that. I did give Chris this afternoon a name and a phone number where you could get hooked up with a committee of citizens to participate in the neighborhood revitalization committee, and that is what's going to guide us after this is all done. So thank you very much.
If I may, I would just like to thank everyone tonight. Government can be kind of a messy business. I'm not sure we didn't disprove that tonight at all, but I thank everyone for participating, and I'm confident that we can all keep cool heads and that we can make government work more the way it's supposed to. Thank everybody, including my fellow council members.
Yes, and I would like to just give some kudos to Gerald Dahl for putting that together so quickly. That was pretty impressive.
It was. I want to thank everyone for coming in. I mean, this is community at its best. So thank you, and thanks staff and Jerry for great job.
Okay, moving on. Council Bill number 28-2018. Christie.
Thank you. Council Bill number 28-2018, an ordinance amending the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning wildlife and waterfowl. This ordinance is on first reading. Staff is recommending new rules and regulations concerning the feeding of wildlife and waterfowl be considered with existing regulations on the treatment of wild animals. This ordinance amends Chapter 4, Animals, Chapter 16, Miscellaneous Offenses, in Chapter 17.
Okay, is there?
It's a first reading, so.
It's first reading, just take a motion.
Reading, so, okay. Larry, 29 to 8.
No, here, I'll,
Oh,
She has
that's
to-
right.
we have to vote on
just the first reading. I move to approve Council Bill number 28-2018, an ordinance amending the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning wildlife and waterfowl on first reading. Order it published. Public hearing set first Monday, November 26, 2018 at 7 p.m. in City Hall Council Chambers, and that it take effect 15 days after final publication.
Second.
Okay,
I love that.
gonna do the third one.
We need to vote.
Oh, well, that's, oh yeah, that's first reading. We have one more on first reading.
Remember, you know, they have those special things.
We got to vote this one first.
Okay.
We need to revote. Hold on, let me clear it. Oh, 6. Motion carries 6-0. Thank you.
Good job, team.
Okay, so we're down to 30, 2019.
Sort of was.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Council Bill number 29-2018, an ordinance amending Chapter 17 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the consumption of fermented malt beverages in city parks. This is an ordinance on first reading, but so the folks understand, I will read part of the issue. Staff is recommending new rules and regulations concerning the consumption of alcohol in city parks. These new rules align with the state of Colorado changes in the definition of fermented malt beverages that are effective January 1st, 2019. This change eliminates the current restriction of 3.2 fermented malt liquid beverages, which is beer, only allowed in parks, and allows malt beverages of up to 6% alcohol by weight.
Okay, there's, should we vote?
You want a motion, sir?
Yeah, I'm ready for a motion.
I move to approve Council Bill number 29-2018, an ordinance amending the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the consumption of fermented malt beverages in city parks on first reading. Order it published, public hearing set for Monday, November 26, 2018 at 7 p.m. in the City Hall Council Chambers, and that it take effect 15 days after that final publication.
Second.
Okay, let's vote.
Motion carries 6-0.
Thanks for the help, guys. Okay, we're down to item number 5. Monica? Oh, we just did 4. That's
No, we
good
just
one.
did 3.
Oh, okay.
Just keeping on track. Keep hanging there.
Okay. All right, let's do number 4.
Council Bill number 30-2018, an ordinance amending Chapter 17 of the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning parks and recreation to address the use of electrical assisted bicycles. This is an ordinance on first reading. Staff is recommending new rules and regulations concerning the use of electrical assisted bicycles on city trails. So a motion is in order. I move to approve Council Bill number 30-2018, an ordinance amending the Wheat Ridge Code of Laws concerning the use of electrical assisted bicycles on first reading. Order it published, public hearing set for Monday, November 26, 2018 at 7 p.m. in the City Hall Council Chambers, and that it takes effect 15 days after final publication.
Second.
Geez, Zach.
Should we vote?
Motion carries 6-0.
Okay, now we're at number 5. Monica?
Okay, thank you. Resolution number 67-2018, a resolution in support of West Metro Fire Protection District ballot issue 7C. Issue: West Metro Fire Protection District ballot issue 7C is a tax stabilization initiative for the West Metro Fire Protection District. The district is asking to adjust its mill levy to offset revenue loss due to changes in the residential assessment rate pursuant to the provisions of the Gallagher Amendment with the Colorado Constitution. And I just want to stress that this is not a tax increase.
Okay, is there a second?
You ready for a motion?
Move it first, right.
I move to approve resolution number 67-2018, a resolution of City Council in support of West Metro Fire Protection District ballot issue 7C.
Second.
Thank you. Let's vote. Unless there are comments. Okay.
Motion carries 6-0.
City managers matters.
You're quick. Thank you, Mayor Pro Tem. Just a reminder for everybody that the Optimus Pancake Supper, annual Pancake Supper, is this Thursday, 5:30 to 8 at Wheat Ridge High School. It's a fundraiser for youth programs in our community. I did get an update today from Denver Transit Partners on the G line. Their updates are very difficult to decipher, so I haven't had a chance to call him back, but it sounds like it's good news. They're getting some approvals, and it sounds like it's been moved to the Federal Railroad Administration for their final approvals. So it sounds like things are moving forward, but again, it's hard to decipher what they say. So hopefully it's good news. I'll let you know further when I get more information.
City attorneys matters.
Nothing tonight, thanks.
Okay, clerk.
We just had the Colorado Municipal Clerks Association annual convention up in, down in Colorado Springs this year. It was attended well. The city of Wheat Ridge was donated a bunch of products to the raffle drawing, highly appreciated by the local clerks. The city clerk's office will also be doing an update to the CML liquor legislation handbook distributed across the state. And Deputy City Clerk will be co-chairing the next webinar for the CML for liquor legislation updates.
Thank you very much. Monica?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Zach?
Nothing tonight, thank you.
Nothing tonight, thank you, except vote and get your vote in.
All right, I already voted, and my vote's in.
Good.
And thank you to the Deputy City Clerk for all the work you do. I think that you're kind of from the Wizard of Oz, the man behind the curtain. So since we have you here, I want to thank you for all your work.
Thank you. Leah?
Yes, so I just wanted to let everybody know that you should have received your ballots by now. There is a drop-off location here at City Hall. Get that in. It needs to be post-dated and sent in a week prior, and you can also drop it off the day of the election by 7 p.m.
Larry?
I'd specifically like to thank Mr. Dahl for assisting me with that messy little business, and also Mr. Goff. I know you guys were conferring back and forth during the whole thing, and also I need to warn our deputy clerk that when I was elected, I told people that I was going to do my best to let them know what happened behind the green curtain, so you'd better start wearing a tie to work.
Okay, I want to thank my team here for helping me tonight, since I didn't know what I was doing, obviously. And unless there is further, I bring this meeting to a close.